Blake's Laocoon. We have to consider the cyclopedia plate next to the separate plate to understand Blake's Laocoon. What is the relationship between the two? When we first view the Laocoon separate plate beside the Laocoon cyclopedia plate, the Byzantine graffiti of the first conjures an 18th century Londonite reading of Borges improvising on the celestial emporium of benevolent knowledge, its irreverent suspension of text violating the neoclassical order proposed by the layout and printing of the cyclopedia plate, with an Orchian middle finger. In the separate plate, the text, like the serpents in the story of Laocoon, entwine the statue in a cloud of asides that hiss with overlapping expression and testament to all that is not said, all that is not printed in the Laocoon raised cyclopedia plate presentation. It is an act of encyclopedic resistance in Pacious formulation, one plate giving the finger to the other, art facing commerce and talking back to it. Where any view of money exists, art cannot be carried on, but war only, Blake victoriously proclaims at the top of the separate plate. Christianity is art, and not money. Money is its curse, whispers up from the toe of Adam, Blake's metonymic son, and child of his apocalyptic responsibility to talk back to the snake. As Paley puts it, Blake may have begun this drawing in opposition to 18th century aesthetic theories, which praised the Laocoon sculpture for its orderly engagement with the tragic. Beginning with Fuseli's 1765 translation of Johann Joachim Winckelmann's reflections on the paintings and sculptures of the Greeks, this valorization of the rational control of the tragic eventually becomes the basis for a theory of the aesthetic at the heart of the Kantian idealism that achieves full flower during the Enlightenment. Cited as the founder of art history, inventor of antiquity, and the godfather of neoclassicism, Winckelmann lies at the root of the 18th century theories about the Laocoon, which establish modern rules of art, aesthetics, and ethics which Blake refutes. An aesthetically significant fact which morphically resonates with Blake's Bansky-esque taking of the Laocoon as his subject 10 years later. Blake's separate plate of the Laocoon reads like a manifesto scrawled by Cy Twombly on an unattended room of the MoMA. Childlike, primitive, spontaneous, uninhibited, and unmediated expression fills the air, with transgressions both innocent and profound. Is Blake the prophet warning his people of their impending destruction by the hand of their own god? Laocoon is that for Troy. As priest of the temple of Poseidon, Neptune, Laocoon discerns the deceit by the Greeks, warns his people to beware, and thrusts a spear at the Trojan horse bearing the gift of Troy's impending destruction. Ordained by the gods, Troy's destruction is not Laocoon's to dictate, only to witness, a fate he rejects with an outcry that results in the death of both his sons and himself, when the serpents of Poseidon writhe up from the foam of the Aegean and strangle him mid-revolt. Behind, the rest of them skims on along the sea. Their mighty backs are curved in folds. The foaming salt surge is roaring. Now they reach the fields. Their eyes are drenched with blood and fire. They burn. They strike a straight line toward Laocoon. At first, each snake entwines the tiny bodies of his two sons in an embrace, then feasts its fangs on their defenseless limbs. The pair next seize upon Laocoon himself, who nears to help his sons, carrying weapons. They wind around his waist and twice around his throat. They throttle him with scaly backs, their heads and steep necks tower over him. With that, the city falls, preordained, leaving nothing but the line of Priam brightly signified by Aeneas, who escapes the city's destruction, symbolically bearing his father on his shoulders, better lit than the flames that consume the city. No sooner had the old man spoken so than thunder crashed upon the left, and through the shadows ran a shooting star, its trail a torch of flooding light. At last, won over by this sign, my father rises. My son, I go with you as your companion. Come then, dear father, mount upon my neck. I'll bear you on my shoulders. Empire against art, Blake states in the separate plate. See Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6, verse 848. It is in Book 2 of the Aeneid that the martyred prophet Laocoon first appears mid-cry, as depicted above. But it is Book 6 that gives the iteration of the Pax Romana, the reason Emperor Augustus had commissioned Virgil to write the Aeneid in the first place. Romans, these will be your arts, to teach the ways of peace to those you conquer. Aeneas, having passed through the halls of hell into the land of shades, to speak with his ancestors and be granted a vision of imperial Rome, is shown the future where Pax Romana will rule. Book 6, however, is also the book in which there are two gates of sleep. The one is said to be of horn. Through it an easy exit is given to true shades. The other is of polished ivory, perfect, glittering, but through that way the spirits send false dreams into the world above. And Book 6 is the book that closes with Aeneas's father, Anchises, sending his son Aeneas not through the gate of horn, for an easy exit given to true shades, but instead through the perfect, glittering ivory gate, along the path of false dreams. Having obtained the golden bough and thus access to prophetic vision by divine right, Aeneas's passage through the gate of ivory marks, by way of aside, Virgil's probable political commentary on the Pax Romana myth he helped to popularize. Echoing Laocoon's struggle with the fate of the Trojan people, Blake the prophet, like Laocoon the priest, is consumed by the contrived battle between good and evil that he confronts with an incantation of reclamation in the proliferating commentary enveloping the image in the plate. A final prolific struggle, the words enveloping, or a more Blakean word for it, emanating from the image, are Blake's spears, thrust against the false gift of the religion of Yahweh and his two sons, Satan and Adam. Reconceived this way, the Laocoon becomes Jehovah, eaten alive by the Mosaic Eurasianic code that arises from the false struggle between good and evil, here represented as the brothers, Satan and Adam. Good and evil are riches and a poverty, a tree of misery, propagating generation and death. Again and again, in the graffiti that comprises the separate plate, natural religion and empire emerge as two heads of the same hydra that brings war and misery to people by denigrating the imagination which is the source of the divine in humankind. Art denigrated, imagination denied, war governed the nations, is the subliminal pedestal on which the print of the Laocoon statue rests. The eternal body of man is the imagination. That is God himself, the divine body. These are not the works of Egypt or Babylon, whose gods are the powers of this world, goddess, nature, who first despoil, then destroy imaginative art for their glory, is war and dominion. The Laocoon is Blake's prophetic challenge to the legacy of Enlightenment aesthetics, one that explodes the stoicism implicit in the neoclassical model of Winckelmann, Lessing, Baumgarten, and Kant, which agreed so well with 18th century British commercialism, and restores the tragic irrationality to the struggle of human life that is ultimately redeemed by the imagination seen as the Christ, what is divine in the human. Perhaps, Blake said, the Laocoon held the key to his poetry because the Laocoon is Blake's self-portrait. Like Laocoon, Blake's poetry prophesies the collapse of the old social order. But as a poet, and therefore true Christian and maker of art, a poet, a painter, a musician, an architect, a man or a woman who is not one of these is not a Christian. Blake, as Laocoon, is redeemed through his hymn to the imagination that comes from living in Christ consciousness. It is here that the Laocoon of natural religion and imperial Rome is recuperated, restored to Michelangelo to inspire Winckelmann and Lessing, and finally confronted by Blake with his chisel of light and engraver's black ink to compose his own variation on this hymn to the aesthetic dimension that never dies, no matter how fatefully we bury it. For according to Blake, Jesus and his apostles and disciples were all artists, and the Old and New Testament are the great code of art.